Sometimes you just want to get the real story behind something amazing, right? Understand how it happened, get those aha moments, but without drowning in information.
Exactly.
Well, that's what we're aiming for today. We're doing a deep dive into Santa Rita do Sapucaí in Brazil. It's this town that, kind of against the odds, became known as Brazil's Valley of Electronics.
And we're drawing heavily from a really fascinating book, Allah's the Light, by João Brentan. It tells the story of the São Miguel hydroelectric plant.
Ah.
But it does more than that. It weaves that story into the town's whole development using great photos, documents. It really paints a picture of this place having like a century-long entrepreneurial streak.
Right. So our mission here is basically to pull out the key pieces. How did this relatively small town manage this huge leap, first in energy, then technology? Okay, let's get into it. Where does this story really kick off?
It really starts with one person, Antonio Tonico Moreira de Costa Filho, born back in 1867.
Tonico.
Yeah. And by all accounts, he was, well, bold, innovative spirit, deeply involved in coffee, sugarcane, but definitely a natural entrepreneur.
And he wasn't alone in this, was he? I gather his family, his brothers, were also pretty significant figures.
Oh, absolutely. Crucial context. His younger brother, Delfim Moreira da Costa Ribeiro, became a major politician, vice president, even president of Brazil briefly.
Wow.
And another brother, Chico Francisco, he was a big agricultural producer and, interestingly, founded a financial institution.
So, quite the influential family.
You can imagine those Sunday morning chats they apparently had at their mother's house, early 1900s, discussing the news, modernity, all the changes happening.
Yeah, sets the scene perfectly. Brazil itself was changing so fast then, wasn't it? Industrial revolution hitting railways, steamships, and the very beginnings of electricity.
Exactly. And, Brazil wasn't actually that behind on some things. Telegraphy came in 1852. Yeah. And they even had public demos of electric lights way back in 1857. There's this great quote from an engineer, Andre Rabusa, describing a ball for the emperor. He called the lighting dazzling.
Dazzling. But it sounds like it was mostly just demos, right? Not like widespread power yet, maybe railway stations, factories.
Precisely. Still a novelty for most people. Which makes Tonico's idea of bringing hydroelectric power to his town seem even more ambitious,
Definitely.
Now, here's a really key detail. Back then, late 19th, early 20th century Minas Gerais, getting permission for energy projects wasn't up to the federal government.
Oh, who was it then?
It was the local authorities, municipalities, even smaller districts. They had this surprising level of autonomy in granting concessions.
Huh. So that local control really opened the door for someone like Tonico.
It really did. And the specific spark for him, it seems to have been news from Germany. They were pioneering high-voltage, long-distance power transmission.
Right, like sending power further away.
Exactly. The Laufen to Frankfurt line in 1891 was a huge example. Sent AC power over 175 kilometers. Revolutionary stuff.
Because it meant you didn't need the power plant right next door. You could use that distant waterfall.
Precisely. That was the key insight. It opened up possibilities.
So that must have lit a fire under him.
Yeah.
What were his first practical steps? How did he go from idea to action?
Well, his first thought was checking out the land beyond the nearby mountain range. He reached out to a friend, João Eusebio de Almeida.
Okay.
This guy knew the area really well, so Tonico invited him to visit the San Miguel waterfall. They needed to seriously assess its hydropower potential, feet on the ground.
Right, that initial reconnaissance, was it actually doable?
Okay.
So they find a promising spot. What's next to make this real?
Forming a company, that was the crucial move. They established Minas Sul.
Minas Sul, got it.
Tonico was the majority shareholder, and the Moreira family together held over 51%. Smart move politically. They brought in Colonel Joaquim Inácio Ribeiro as president, a really respected local figure, important for the town's history.
Oh, it brings credibility.
Exactly. And Ettore Bertoncini, an experienced engineer, became technical director. Tonico made it clear, though, total dedication required from everyone.
Sets the tone. Leadership. And you mentioned a deadline earlier. It sounds like they were under pressure from the start.
Absolutely. A really demanding deadline. They had to get the power to Santa Rita just 2 years after getting the state concession to build.
2 years. That's incredibly tight.
It was. And the book really stresses this. The biggest hurdle wasn't necessarily the engineering itself. It was logistics. pure transportation.
Getting everything there. Yeah, I can imagine. Something we barely think about now, but back then.
Monumental. I mean, for 400 years, the ox wagon was it for moving goods in rural Brazil. That was the backbone.
So that's what they had to rely on.
Pretty much. And Tonico, smartly, hired a top-notch ox wagon driver, really experienced, respected guy named Dito Brabo.
Dito Brabo. Okay, that name definitely stands out. Sounds like a character.
He really was, from the sounds of it. Loved his work, loved his oxen. He actually talked about them like a brotherhood, said they respected the driver, even enjoyed the work, especially when the wagon was singing.
Singing?
Yeah, you know that creaking sound the wooden axles made? He saw it as part of the journey, part of the rhythm.
That's amazing. It wasn't just about hauling stuff. It was this whole relationship, this understanding.
Exactly right. And Dito was meticulous, selecting the oxen, training them, pairing them up. Even gave them names like Cigano and Viajante, Bronco and Fumasa.
Love it. Love it.
They even did practical tests. Loaded the wagons with cobblestones being quarried for paving the town square. Put the oxen and wagons through their paces.
A real-world stress test.
Smart.
Did they hit major roadblocks, literally or figuratively, during this transport planning?
Oh, yeah. One big one was in 1906. The main bridge got damaged in a flood.
Oh, problem.
Even after repairs, Tonico was cautious. He actually sought official permission from the governor to cross it with a heavy 10-ton load. Didn't want to risk it.
Yeah.
And Dito Brabo came up with a clever plan, used multiple ox teams and a chain, basically to spread the weight out more evenly across the bridge structure.
Ingenious, just practical problem solving. And the actual route to the plant site. I bet that wasn't exactly a highway.
Far from it. Narrow trails, winding, full of ruts, potholes, thick brush. They had to deal with marshes, streams with unpredictable currents, steep banks, and lots of fragile little bridges.
Sounds treacherous.
Strengthening those bridges became a major task in itself. Thousands of trips would be needed.
So while Dito's figuring out how to move mountains of stuff, what about the actual power plant design?
Siemens was handling that, with Ettore Bertoncini supervising. Key part was a big steel pipeline, over 100 meters long, to get water to the turbines.
Okay.
And here's a smart logistical call. Ettore initially thought about 2 big turbine generator sets, but he switched to 3 smaller ones.
Why smaller?
Easier transport, might cost a bit more overall, but moving 3 smaller, lighter units would be significantly less difficult than 2 massive ones, especially on those trails.
Ah, that makes total sense. Breaking the problem down. Smart thinking. Okay, what about getting the power from the plant to Santa Rita, the transmission line?
Another huge challenge,
That's right.
especially crossing the Serra da Manuela mountain range. That involved an elevation change of over 400 meters.
Ape.
Yeah. So Tonico needed specialized expertise. He brought in Paulo Cabral. This guy was an experienced electrician, had worked on some of Brazil's longest lines already.
So a seasoned pro.
Right. And apparently Cabral found the Minas Sol project particularly interesting because of those geographical challenges. He liked the difficulty.
The tough jobs attract the best sometimes. Isn't there some local story tied to that mountain range too?
There is, yeah. The legend of Yuca Machado and Manuela. A tragic local tale about jealousy and loss set right there near Vintum Creek on the Serra da Manuela. Gives you a sense of the local history, the backdrop.
Adds a layer to it. So Cabral gets to work planning the line route with his team, Israel and Arasa. What do they have to figure out?
Everything, basically. Where exactly each pole should go, considering the terrain, trying to keep the line as straight as possible to minimize power loss.
Right.
Cabral, despite being older, was apparently super energetic, hiking up steep hills, wading into forests himself to check the path. They had to decide on pole type steel or treated wood, choose the right insulators, those things that stop the electricity leaking. Crucial stuff.
Especially with high voltage, right? How high were we talking?
22,000 volts.
Oh.
AC. Definitely dangerous.
Yeah, no kidding.
So for the wire, they needed strength and conductivity. They chose copper wire with a steel core and communication. They needed a way for the power plant crew way out there to talk to the substation crew back in town.
How'd they manage that back then?
Initial solution. Battery-powered telephones. Simple but effective. 2 12-volt batteries wired together. Basic but absolutely essential for coordination.
The basic but vital. And the substation in Santa Rita itself. What went into designing that?
Key components there. Transformers, obviously. Step the voltage up at the plant for transmission, then step it down in town for use.
Right.
Also safety gear, circuit breakers, disconnect switches, protective relays to handle faults, control panels, and lightning rods. Very important.
Can't forget those.
And Tonico, being Tonico, was deeply involved in checking everything. He even looked into best practices from American companies and another big Brazilian firm, Ginley and Cia. Meticulous.
It's like he left no stone unturned. While all this technical stuff is happening, there was a political angle too, right? With his brother Delfim.
Oh, hugely important. Tonico Moreira's political maneuvering was absolutely vital. In 1908, he got himself elected president of the municipal chamber.
Strategic move.
Totally. It gave him the position to really champion the project, push through necessary approvals, smooth over potential political bumps. He was a tireless supporter of his brother's vision.
Using his influence directly for the project. Fascinating how it all connects. I even read something about rival music bands tied to local politics.
Yes. Isn't that great? It really brings the time alive. So the Liberal Party, a big force, backed Maestro Barbosa's band, very popular locally.
Oh.
So the other side, the Republican Party, which included Tonico's father-in-law, Joaquim Carneiro de Paiva, they rallied and formed their own band under Maestro Vindolino.
Music battles reflecting politics. Love it.
Shows how intertwined everything was back then. Community life, politics, even music.
So eventually, despite all that, they got the formal green light they needed.
They did. Big step in 1910. The City Council approved Bill 123. That granted Minas Sol a 25-year privilege for an electric industry in town. The legal foundation.
Okay, permission granted. Smooth sailing from there.
Surprisingly, no. Even with the bill passed, the project kind of stalled for about a year.
A year? Why?
The source doesn't specify exactly why, but it put them under even more pressure. That initial 2-year deadline from the state concession was ticking. Risks and expenses were piling up for Minas Sol during that delay.
Wow, talk about needing resilience. What got things moving again?
The final signing of the contract with Siemens seems to have been the key. Locked in the technical side, the equipment. And recognizing the roads were still an issue, João Eusebio, acting as the municipal executive, really pushed improvements, widening curves, compacting soil, making them passable for heavy loads.
Right, infrastructure had to catch up. Land acquisition must have been tricky, too, for a project this size.
For sure. Tonico's brother, Chico, actually owned the land needed for the substation in town, which helped.
Convenient?
Yeah. For the transmission line right-of-way heading towards the mountains, they initially cut a deal with the landowner. Gabriel Capistrano de Alckmin gave him shares in Minas Sol for access.
Exactly.
But getting the land beyond the mountain range was tougher. Took more negotiation. Again, João Eusebio's skills were apparently crucial in working directly with those landowners to get agreements.
So land secured, contract signed, roads improving. Finally time to really start building. What was the first focus?
Setting up the support infrastructure. Basically, building work camps. Strategically placed camps for the workers and, importantly, all the animals needed for transport.
Housing the army, basically.
Pretty much. Practical barns that doubled as offices and storage, simple housing for the guys, a dining hall, even corrals with running water for the oxen and horses. Just feeding and caring for those animals was a huge logistical task.
Like building a temporary town to build the permanent infrastructure.
Exactly. And Tonico even organized a whole week of talks to make sure everyone understood the project. Had Adolf explain the hydropower theory, Aitor detail the designs, and crucially, Paulo Cabral warn everyone about electrical dangers like induction and the need for grounding during construction.
Smart. Safety first.
It's pretty amazing how much prep work started even before all the contracts were totally finalized. That 1912 deadline was really driving things.
Okay, the stage is absolutely set. Teams ready, plans detailed. Let's get into the thick of it, the construction phase. This is where the vision really starts becoming concrete, literally. First big milestone here.
Well, the arrival of all that equipment from overseas, November 1911, that was huge.
It's been exciting.
Yeah, but immediately followed by the headache of customs clearance, then hauling everything from the port in Rio all the way inland to Santa Rita. Big cost, big challenge.
Bet. Especially those massive, heavy pieces. How did they even move them?
The really long turbine and generator shafts were a particular problem. The train could only take them so far.
Right.
Then it was back to Dito Bravo and his oxen. He came up with this brilliant idea. Had the workshop master, Mr. Gumersindo, craft a special longer yoke for the lead ox pair.
A longer yoke. How did that help?
It let the long shaft stick out safely over the front of the wagon bed. They added a support structure there, too, to keep it stable. Really clever adaptation.
Wow, that's fantastic practical ingenuity.
Yeah.
So Dito and his ox wagons were just constantly on the move.
Absolutely relentless. Hauling sand, cement, iron, lime bricks, everything needed for the dam, the powerhouse buildings. And keeping those wagons rolling, it meant constant maintenance. Gumersindo's carpentry team was always busy with repairs.
It wasn't just about brute strength, though, was it? I heard there were moments of real collaborative problem solving on the site.
Oh, definitely. Like, they needed to move this really heavy bearing into place. The excavation crew chief offered his excavators. The forestry guys provided logs to use as temporary rails.
Teamwork.
Yeah. Nicolau from the tool shop brought a block and tackle. Their first try lifting it with a makeshift crane failed. Ground was too soft.
Uh-oh.
But they didn't give up. Dismantled the crane, reinforced the ground with rocks, tried again, and it worked. Resourcefulness under pressure.
That's the spirit. What about the dam itself? That sounds like a monumental task.
It really was. And Tonico, maybe being a bit audacious with that deadline looming, actually started excavating before all the land was officially acquired.
Bold.
They prepped the site, diverted the river flow, marked out the dam's location, and the concrete pouring. Estimates are around 1,500 wheelbarrows full of concrete. Just imagine the sheer manual labor.
Incredible. Really puts the human effort into perspective. And getting those huge steel pipes down the waterfall slope, how did they manage that?
Another ingenious setup, they built a heavy-duty cargo lift, used a strong steel cable anchored to the partly built dam with pulleys and chain hoists.
Like a makeshift elevator.
Kind of, yeah. They lowered those long, heavy pipes down the steep slope very slowly, very carefully. Took precise coordination from the crew guiding them.
Okay, shifting focus to the transmission line. Clearing the path for the poles across that landscape must have been tough.
Definitely. They needed a clear corridor, at least 4 meters wide. That meant cutting through all sorts of vegetation-dense Atlantic forest in some parts, scrubbier cerrado in others. Sometimes they even had to divert the route slightly to avoid massive trees.
And then getting the actual poles, long, heavy things into position.
More ingenuity. Arasa and Mr. Gumershendo figured out a way using an ox wagon again. They'd strap one end of the pole onto the wagon and the other end rested on a separate wheeled platform. An assistant walked alongside, using ropes to steer the platform, keeping the pole steady, especially on winding mountain paths. Once close, oxen would drag it the final bit. Then, digging those deep holes for stability, more hard manual work.
Okay, poles are going up. Now for maybe the most visually striking part, stringing the actual wires across valleys and hills. How on earth did they do that?
This is where Susanna comes in. Remember Dito Bravo? He assigned Susanna, who had this amazing connection with her oxen team, this crucial job.
Susanna and her oxen. Okay.
She led the oxen that pulled the heavy copper wires. Apparently, she barely needed to raise her voice. The animals just responded to her quiet commands. It was delicate work, had to avoid snagging the wire, getting it tangled.
Wow.
A whole team of installers walked along with the wire, watching, signaling back to Susanna if there were any problems.
Like a slow, careful dance across the landscape. I read a little story about Susanna sometimes riding an ox back to camp.
That's right. Her colleagues apparently gave her some good-natured teasing about it, but she was clearly a respected, key part of the team.
That's great.
Once the wire reached an anchor pole, it was lifted, attached securely to the insulator, stopping the electricity escaping, and grounded for safety. Then the linemen would carefully adjust the tension, getting the right amount of sag between poles.
So much detail involved. And all this happening at once, right? Dam construction, poles going up, roads being worked on, powerhouse assembly, Zé Carlos in his wagon still hauling supplies.
Absolutely. Coordination must have been intense, and they kept hitting these little, unexpected challenges that required creative solutions.
Like what?
Well, Arsan needed permission from a local community led by this guy, Pachola, to string wires across their land. Delicate situation.
How did he handle it?
His solution, throw a barbecue.
Yeah.
Sponsored by Minas Sol, of course. It built goodwill, let him talk to Pachola, understand their conditions, like the crew couldn't cut down any trees themselves. Deal done.
Huh. Barbecue diplomacy. Brilliant. And when the terrain itself was just awful, like that difficult plateau.
More resourcefulness. Where wagons couldn't easily go, they used temporary gin poles. Basically makeshift cranes anchored to trees with hand winches to lift the poles. Sometimes they'd pull a lighter pilot wire across first, then use that to pull the heavier main wire, avoiding dragging it on rough ground.
Always finding a way.
Yeah.
What was life actually like for the workers in those camps day to day?
Basic, for sure. Demanding. But sounds like there was a strong sense of community. Meals often used local food. Getting enough water was a constant job.
Oh, fun.
Occasional barbecues, maybe with some cachaça from the local Bom Retiro distillery. And the book includes characters like Zé Mundo, a brilliant lineman apparently, but also known for enjoying his weekends perhaps a bit too much. Adds that human touch,
Definitely. Real people, real lives behind this huge project. Okay, almost there. What was the final big technical hurdle before the lights could come on?
The final turbine test. Henrique Baytex from Siemens oversaw it. Really tense moment.
I bet.
Yeah. They spun the turbine up way faster than normal operating speed. Intense vibrations. Everyone just holding their breath, wondering if it would hold together under the stress.
It did it.
It did. Passed the test. Huge relief.
Phew. And then, finally, power flowed to Santa Rita. Must have been utterly transformative.
It was, but not overnight for everyone. It was still a novelty.
Yeah.
There are funny stories about kids stealing light bulbs because they'd never seen one, people not quite sure how to use this new power.
A learning curve.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And early consumer relations issues, too, like Joaquim Carnero de Abreu complaining about the rates being too high and Tonico having to deal with that directly. The dawn of the electric bill.
Fascinating glimpse into that transition. Okay, the lights are on. What's the lasting legacy of this whole incredible effort?
Oh, it was profound. Went way beyond just light bulbs. Tonico Moreira, the brother, continued his political rise, always helping the region. The telephone network expanded, connecting Santa Rita better. But maybe the most significant thing, education. Tonico helped found the Instituto de Ensino Gimnasio, later IME. It became a vital school, producing top professionals. They saw early on how crucial education was for the future.
That focus on education seems key to Santa Rita's later story, too.
Absolutely, because then Theodomir Santiago, a cousin of Tonico's, built on that. He established the Instituto Electrotécnico y Mecánico de Itaúba, IME nearby.
IME, okay.
That became a huge center for electrical engineering in Brazil. Produced a massive percentage of the country's engineers for decades. It's a direct line from that first power plant to this educational powerhouse.
Incredible ripple effect.
Yeah.
And did other towns follow Santa Rita's lead with hydropower?
They did. San Miguel proved it could be done. Other plants popped up in the region, Lourenço Velho, Bueno de Paiva. Eventually, though, the industry changed. Bigger companies like CSME, even multinationals, absorbed Minas Sul. Consolidation happened.
Right. The energy world kept evolving.
Yeah.
And broader events like the 1929 crash, the coffee crisis, they must have hit the region hard.
For sure. New regulations changed the electricity sector, too. Locally, figures like Elpidio Costa, head of the local bank, really struggled with the coffee crisis fallout.
Tough times.
But that core spirit of Santa Rita seemed to endure. You see it in people participating in the 1932 Constitutional Revolution, in the town keeping its vibrant culture going, especially those famous carnival celebrations.
So even as bigger hydro projects came online elsewhere, the original San Miguel plant left its mark.
Definitely. It was eventually deactivated in 1976. Bigger plants were just more economical by then. Sadly, preserving it wasn't a priority at the time. But today, the waterfall itself is a tourist spot. And the original substation building, it's now the Municipal Department of Culture. The author, Brenton, even shares memories of growing up near it, hearing the hum of electricity, a living link to the past.
But the story didn't stop with electricity, did it? Santa Rita kept evolving, innovating.
Exactly. That's the next chapter. 1964, the founding of INATEL, the National Institute of Telecommunications. A huge pivot towards a new field.
Telecoms. Oh.
Then came FAI, the Faculty of Administration and Informatics. More education, fostering entrepreneurship, attracting talent. Santa Rita even became known for healthcare tech innovation later on.
From hydropower pioneers to a modern tech hub, that's quite a trajectory.
And what's amazing is how they've kept their local culture alive through all this change. Food festivals like Sabor Zuvel, those huge carnival parties, the famous Bloco do Urso.
So respecting the past while building the future. And recently, it's really cemented its reputation as a tech center.
Oh, yeah. The technological district is well established. They have collaborations with German institutions. And these newer events like CCCF, the Creative and Collaborative Cities Festival, and especially Hacktown, are drawing national, even international attention, driving innovation.
I read that observation by Bob Deutsch, the American visitor, seeing donkey carts alongside tech startups.
Isn't that a perfect image? That blend of old and new. Carlos Enrique Centrevalela also talks about this strong sense of collective identity. People see these modern initiatives as representing the whole city.
So what are the core ingredients, looking back?
Consistently, people point to a few things. This deep-seated drive for innovation, a culture that accepts risk, an environment where collaboration just happens, and constantly drawing strength from that pioneering history. They even have a 2030 plan looking ahead.
It really is an incredible journey. Over a century, from Tonico's audacious vision for local power to this buzzing hub of technology and creativity.
It's such a powerful example of what entrepreneurial spirit, community working together, and sheer ingenuity can achieve, even against huge obstacles. And like Bob Dorch said, it's that unique mix, tradition, and modernity living side by side that really defines Santa Rita.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? How can a community's specific history, those foundational moments, that local culture, how can all that lay the groundwork for such unexpected transformations, for success in totally new fields? Definitely something to mull over, maybe thinking about our own communities. Thanks so much for joining us on this journey.